Welcome to the Swine Time Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Wayne. I'm one of the staff veterinarians here at Pipestone, one of the owners in Pipestone Holdings, and I get to do this fun podcast. And today my guest is Jim Marzolf. Jim was with me a little bit earlier for an earlier podcast. I'll call it part one of this. This is part two, and the topic is succession planning. And so we covered earlier basically succession planning, more family dynamics, more touchy-feely parts of how you would navigate that. This will be a second part of that discussion, which will be more on developing next-generation leaders, structurally organizing your family business and how you want to do that correctly. So I'll stop talking and turn it over to Jim, and you can start off wherever you want.
Well, I appreciate that, Spencer. No, that's good. No, Spencer and I were talking about, succession and what are the pieces and parts here. And one of the things that I had mentioned was those next generation leaders, we need to try to figure out how to get them in the seat, if you will. And a lot of times mom and dad have the seat. And when difficult decisions come up, we want to try to figure out how we're going to move those children, 30 or 40-year-old children, but children, into the decision-making role. So I've just watched it over and over and over again, and what it just really screams is how do we turn these heirs into the leaders, right? So as we kind of go through that, it's it is really, as I think of it, the first thing that we try to accomplish is we're trying, if I'm the generation one, I'm mom and dad, I'm trying to move my responsibility for the management of the company to generation two, right? And so when the company was smaller, because most of them have grown, it was pretty easy to say, well, I just got a job to do. I'm going to go out and do my job and probably don't have a lot of employees and back in the day. And this thing just kind of evolved. And so here they are ready to take the reins, and it's not this little farm anymore. It has a lot of employees and a lot of sophistication and a lot of, generally a lot of activities going on. And so these leaders need to, next-gen leaders need to try to figure out how do I get my arms around that, right? And so I've walked into situations where, I'm asking the question, well, who reports to who, and how do we know they're doing a good job? And how are we are we accomplishing our goals? Are we creating a culture of accountability and things like that? And I could say almost all farms look at me like, what? Right? It's not that they don't know. It's just that they haven't done it at their place. Right?
Yeah. So you got some things you listed out earlier. One of them was job description, right? That's a job description and titles. But if it's a family farm setting where it went from small to large, those probably aren't defined. It's just that, well, you always have done that, and you just kind of do your job. But now you got a lot of employees. What's a good first step if a family said we've got to become more sophisticated? What's a good first step org chart description or role definition? What does that look like if you're taking the first steps into it as a good example?
Well, the first thing that I usually like to do is start with who's in charge, right? And that's pretty obvious usually. But then it's the who will be in charge, right? And how do we start to groom that individual with the roles that make a difference? That as time elapses, they can slide into the who's in charge seat.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that. I mean, that's more of a long game approach, as opposed to the immediate accountability. And I'm in charge of the crops, and I'm in charge of manure hauling, and I'm in charge of feed, and I'm in charge of pigs or grow finish or sows. And these are the things that I do. Right. So that if something were to happen, that we know what it is you do. Right. And the larger the organizations get, and they are getting more complicated and significant in size and scale, it's important that we have that kind of documented, right? Okay. That we've at least, and when I say documented, I'm really saying let's think through that. Let's be granular about it and say, all right, what are the pieces that you do? And then the next thing is, if you're going to elevate your role, you need to figure out what you're not going to do. And we all go through that in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. We all have jobs, and there are things we generally like to do. And what's difficult is when those things are the things you should no longer be doing anymore, because the company needs you to do more important jobs, mm-hmm. right? So it is a job description, organizational chart kind of activity that really gets you to think through, all right, what is it I'm doing today? What should I or shouldn't I be doing today? And how do I move to the next thing? Right.
Yeah, I thought of something else, and you mentioned this earlier when we were speaking. You'll have job descriptions and titles, whatever
mm-hmm.
might go with it, but then the need to let, if somebody's got an area that they're in charge of, letting them be in charge of it without the older generation coming and calling the shots, but mm-hmm. deferring to that, so that person doesn't just have a title, but they actually are empowered to do that, and then get the confidence that comes with it, the penalty or benefit that comes with it, doing it right or wrong. And so you can't just give somebody a title and still jump down and tell people what to do. That's right. You have to defer to them. Yeah. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's completely right. And it's sometimes very hard to do, right? It's so obvious. We can all come up with our own examples of that. It's so obvious what needs to get done. I'll just go do it. And I hear that a lot. I hear that even when it comes to hiring people. Well, it's too hard to find somebody or too hard to train somebody. I'll just do it myself. Well, the organization doesn't move forward when we all think like that. So,
yeah. What about on the end of accountability, letting somebody make mistakes? It's not all about sunny days and everything. So if people are going to make mistakes, how do you work with accountability? Because you have to let somebody be accountable, but not so accountable for such a huge area that the farm fails on that, mm-hmm. if it's something you could have prevented. So is this something where you say, well, year one, this much? I mean, you must have to pace it out, or is it even that intentional? I mean, you can't put it all on the young generation and let them screw up so bad. So there has to be some shift of that. It's gradual.
Yeah, I would say the word intentional is perfect, because I've watched families not give next gen kind of the things to make mistakes, opportunities to make mistakes. And that's also intentional, right? It's a level of trust. And so you have to meter it out, and you have to make the significance grow, right? Mm-hmm. And so prove to me that you can make this decision, it's not going to take the farm down, and then I'll let you have the next one. But it is very intentional. And it's super hard for people when they've been the one sitting in the seat, calling the shots, making the decisions, to let that go. Mm-hmm. And so if we aren't intentional about that, growth doesn't happen for generation 2. Just it stops. And then they get frustrated.
So what if a family says, we want to get more sophisticated, we would like to have defined roles, an org chart, and these type of things? What are the resources out there? Is that something you can go to a website and say, well, here's a template? Or do you need to get a professional, somebody? We talked in the past, you got yourself a family attorney, mm-hmm. An accountant, somebody. You need to have somebody that helps you define those roles. Is that essential, or do some people just do it on their own perfectly well?
Some people will figure it out on their own. Many will figure it out on their own. If they stop to think, hey, this thing needs some structure. Often there isn't structure, right, in terms of the organization. There might be entity structure, but there's not organizational structure that is very specific and has, you're accountable for this level of performance. There might be structure where you're accountable for the pigs and I'm accountable for the crops, but do we actually say when success happens? Like, what does success look like? Yeah. That kind of accountable.
Yeah. What is success? That's a great question, because I think, does the young generation ever get fired? I mean, it can. I mean, you may have seen that.
They can, but it's got to be pretty dramatic to fire your only exit plan.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. How can you get overcomplicated on these things? What would be the stay out of that ditch kind of a role? If you say, I'm the third vice president of, mm-hmm. A soybean field in the back 40, I don't know where would you say you get overly complicated?
It generally doesn't happen. It generally doesn't happen, but it could. You could overthink it, right? And so I'm not suggesting that we overthink it. I am just saying we need some level of structure and, to actually think through what is it you do every day? And, mm-hmm. And the person above you, what is it they do every day? And then which of those things are you going to begin to take on? And when you do that, so you don't have a job and a half, What are you going to let go of?
How often should a family review this? If you're saying, hey, my role was this last year, but now as we come into this year, things have changed. We've grown, we shrunk, whatever.
I would say annually is a good cadence.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What in the best scenario for giving somebody a template? It's we're going to invite our trusted advisor, whoever that is, out for an afternoon. We're going to get some food brought in, and we're going to just focus on these topics. Somebody's got to take charge. Maybe that's the person you've empowered to guide these steps anyway. It might not be a family member that organizes it.
Yeah, it varies, right? Some families are very self-motivated. Others need outside accountability, right? And there's no wrong answer, right? It's just who the humans are in play. And so I would say somebody needs to make sure we're moving the ball, right? And that could be your accountant, could be your attorney, but often isn't.
Okay.
And so we just need to figure out who that's going to be. And if it's somebody inside the organization, hold them accountable. And if it isn't, let somebody outside the organization kind of make sure you're moving the needle.
Okay. Without naming names, any cautionary tales where you've seen this not happen right, where people haven't structured themselves right, where it's turned badly, I don't know if you got anything to share, like, this is, when it doesn't go right, it looks kind of like this.
Yeah, I would say usually when it doesn't go well is when generation 1 isn't allowing generation 2 to kind of stake their claim, so to speak, to have more skin in the game. Generation 2 ends up feeling like an employee, begins to wonder if the farm will ever be in their control and purview.
Mm-hmm.
They get frustrated, and then the family dynamics really start to show themselves, right? Okay. When that frustration shows up. So often, that's probably, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I have those kind of visions of families in my mind that are great examples of this. And so that often is, it's just, we want to make sure for the most part that we're giving generation 2 the opportunities as they're ready, right? And we're not holding it back. So. Okay.
I can just think of one. You were very careful about how you described that, but I just remember one in my mind. This is the most obvious case. At some cafe, I remember 15 years ago, I went in to meet some guy, and it was the guy that was running the farm. But he was 90. He was really old. And he says, get out there. And he kind of yelled at his 70-year-old son about go off and do something. And I'm thinking, man, I felt so bad for the situation because I thought this is about 2.5 generations too late on transitioning some level of individual autonomy. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I just think, good grief, that didn't happen right there.
Yeah. And in situations like that, I've seen the exact same thing. I can think of others just like it. And somebody needs to step in and help those folks kind of see that we have to make this an orderly transition, right? Mm-hmm. It needs to go in a timely manner, right? Otherwise people start to lose their enthusiasm. So,
all right. Anything else on this topic you wanted to share? We've covered some good area here.
I think that's probably good. I just see it over and over as I meet with families, just the opportunities to kind of create and groom these next generation leaders.
Yeah. No, the big takeaways I got from you, correct me if I screw anything up here, but you should engage a professional. Mm-hmm. You've got to have some defined job description. It can't be nebulous. It needs to be, I'm saying, documented, written down. Mm-hmm. And then that should be reviewed regularly. Those are some takeaways I got on this. And there's accountability. How much leash do you want to give a person? Mm-hmm. They have to get enough to, like your kids got to burn their hands on the stove a little bit.
Every once in a while. Yep. But we just don't want to take the farm down when we do it.
All right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Jim, again, thanks for being on this podcast.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. The Swine Time Podcast was created for the pork industry and individual pork producers around the country. Hosted by me, Dr. Spencer Wayne with Pipestone Veterinary Services. The podcast contains pork industry news, advancements in animal care, and how to enhance your productivity. Find the Swine Time Podcast at www.pipestone.com or on your favorite listening platform.